I didn't realize my new customer used to be my neighbor until I pulled in her driveway. This is a story I saw from Reddit. The street name had sounded vaguely familiar when I first read it. A few landmarks on the drive over sparked something in me. Nothing solid though, just a prickling sense of recognition that I couldn't place. It only clicked when I actually saw my old childhood home sitting right beside my customer's property. I know it's strange that it took me that long, that I hadn't recognized anything when I put the address into Google, but my uncle moved me out of that quiet neighborhood when I was 6. I barely remembered anything about living on that street or even the house. My girlfriend Ellie, she said that that wasn't quite normal, told me gently that it probably was my brain blocking things out on purpose. But now, as I sat gripping the steering wheel long after I'd parked staring at my childhood home, um, something uneasy was within inside of me. But I backed onto the large wooded area, tall trees looming far above the roof. The bungalow itself looked abandoned, shattered windows, empty bottles scattered across dead yellow grass. Clearly looked like no one lived there in a long time. And a heavy pressure settled in my chest. For a moment, I actually considered leaving. Uh, but I only started my lawn mowing business a few months ago, and I needed the money, and the woman was only my third customer so far. But she hadn't called like the others. She actually emailed instead saying, am interested in your service every week, Sunday work. I replied that Sundays were fine and asked for the address. She sent it following by another message. Door left open Sundays, money on table, help self to drink and meal. It struck me as odd that she'd contacted someone who lived an hour away instead of a local business, but she promised a generous tip. Still sitting in the van, I remembered my old neighbor, elderly maybe, and emails kind of felt that way. Maybe it's the same person. But when I searched my memory for her face, I came up completely blank. Just another thing probably just lost to my strange childhood amnesia. So her lawn was wildly overgrown, like knee-high grass, thick and uneven. The house itself was perfectly normal. It was a neat two-story place with a front porch, well kept enough that the state of the yard felt odd, like almost like it was a choice. So I hesitated, wondering if I should knock or just start the job. But in the end, I got to work, and part of me didn't want to meet her yet. I was delaying it, and I couldn't explain why. So as I mowed, my gaze kept drifting to the fence separating our property from my old home. And it was enormous, easily 10 feet tall. I couldn't believe something like that had been approved in a quiet suburban street. But it wasn't just the size. Every time I looked at it, pressure built up in my eyes. The sensation of a memory forcing its way up while something inside me resisted just as hard. Um, the effort actually made my head throb. So then for a split second, I remembered hair. Long black strands spilling down the fence from the other side, tangled and thin, draped over the timber, clinging to the wood, hanging like a ragged curtain. I remember as a kid seeing this. I'd been frozen on my cheap plastic tricycle. Um, One of the back wheels was actually missing, so I had to balance my weight just to keep it upright. It's a strange, useless little detail that kind of came scrambling back when everything else was lost. The hair shifted slowly above the tip of the fence, and then a pale forehead rose. And then there were eyes, white and cloudy, and I only saw them for a moment when I immediately knew who they were peeking at. It was me, only me. And there had been some strange sound behind me, maybe a voice, maybe somebody calling my name, maybe it wasn't even that strange, but then the eyes vanished, the forehead sank out of sight, the hair slid upwards, strand by strand, slithering over the fence, until there was nothing left at all, just cold washed through my body. Just remembering this now, I tightened my grip on the lawnmower handle and just focused on the lines of grass ahead of me. And I didn't look at the fence again. Surely that had probably just been my imagination. Maybe a bad dream, maybe something made up. Something I maybe even invented out of boredom. No one could peer over a 10-foot tall fence unless they were standing on stilts or balancing on some ridiculous ladder. And even then, why would anyone climb that high just to look at a child playing in the backyard? It didn't make sense. It was too strange to take seriously, just too absurd, so I ignored it. But yet an unease bloomed low in my chest and refused to settle, because the image, the hair spilling over the fence, the eyes watching, was suddenly one of the clearest memories I had from that house. From that time, clearer than anything else I could recall in over a decade. So I just shook my head, forced the image away, and then just got back to work. An hour later, the lawn looked respectable again. I packed my equipment back into my uncle's van, and then I remembered the money. So I knocked on the front door and waited a bit. She said to let myself in, but it felt wrong just to kind of waltz into a stranger's house. So I waited a few minutes before finally reaching for the handle and stepping inside. Miss Ramona? That was her name. Are you home? I called out, remembering her name from the email address. And one of the first things I noticed was the ceiling. It was unusually high. It made the space feel wide and open, almost cavernous. Um, it also made it incredibly cold inside, and just goosebumps just rose over my arms. Most of the ground floor was open plan, so I spotted the kitchen right away, and a wooden table sat by the counter, and there was the money laid out neatly on top of it. Beside it was a glass jug filled with what looked like lemonade. Ice cubes were floating inside, clean glass, a sandwich on a plate. Even the presence of the ice cubes made me think that this drink was laid out recently. Um, but yeah, so I hesitated. It felt silly to be cautious, but I hadn't even met her. So I picked up the money, nearly choked when I counted it. It was four $50 notes. I only charged $60, and she mentioned a tip, sure, but this was excessive. What if she was elderly? What if she miscounted? I took 100 and left the other 100 on the table just in case. And that was when I heard something upstairs. A wheeze, wet and uneven, like air being dragged through damaged lungs. And after that, two sharp creaks snapped through the house in quick succession, floorboards protesting under sudden weight. My body just went rigid. Someone was definitely home. I stared at the staircase. Hello? A voice rang out in the open space. Miss Ramona? No answer. I edged closer to the stairs despite myself, my heart beginning to pound, the noises just replaying in my head. What had made them? What if she had fallen? What if she was hurt? If she was elderly, I told myself I could check. That was a decent thing to do. But another part of me was screaming to leave. The feeling was sudden and absolute, and like stepping into a place where you were just never meant to enter. It was almost like bait. But after a moment, I turned back on the table. I picked up the sandwich so I wouldn't seem rude. My hands clumsy and shaky, and I got out. And when I drove home, I sat in a van for a long time with the engine off, sandwich rest on the passenger seat, and eventually I opened the bread. Inside was butter and raw red meat. I swallowed, then noticed something else threaded through it. Um, I pinched it with my fingers and pulled, and it was a single hair slid free, dark, absurdly long. I told my girlfriend what happened, but left out the part uh, about my strange memory. Ellie laughed and said, "You scared of an old granny?" But I don't know if she's a granny, I said. I've never actually met this woman. She could be a man for all I know. Are you sure, she said, and she was your old neighbor? She said her eyes were soft but insistent, and that gentle look she always got when she was trying to probe something about my childhood. Are you sure you don't remember anything? And the long black hair entered my head again. At that moment, I remembered something else. I remembered a single strand had caught the fence, drifting in the breeze until it detached and floated around to my 6-year-old self. I remember picking it up from the air and playing with it carefully so it wouldn't snap. And I had wrapped it around my arm, amazed that it could almost coil the entire length of my little forearm like linen around an Egyptian mummy. Uh, I shook my head at Ellie's question and told her about the inedible sandwich instead, and she laughed again, shaking her head. The poor woman's probably has dementia. A week later, I went back. I didn't want to, but Ellie had made me realize that I was being ridiculous and that the money mattered. I was 22 years old at the time, and if we ever wanted to move out of my uncle's house, we needed it. So my stomach churned the whole drive. Before I started the mower, my eyes went to the fence again. I remember the long curling fingers reaching over the top, which I hadn't remembered before, and once more I remembered seeing half a face peering down at me, just eyes and a forehead visible above the timber, watching. I reluctantly went inside to collect my payment. This time she'd left $300 bills beside it, a note in handwriting, thin and spidery, "Take all money. Why no drink?" And all was capitalized. Um, my gaze drifted to the jug of lemonade. I filled the glass, intending to pour half it down the sink to make it look like I had some. But instead, for some reason I couldn't explain, I took a small sip, and it was cold and sweet, but it was good. After that, the memories returned, stronger than ever. I had a dream that night, a dream about food being thrown over an enormous fence. Sometimes it was roast chicken, still warm inside a plastic bag, juices sloshing from the sides. Other times it was a whole chicken, raw, feathers still clinging to the pale skin. Like, ugh. Sometimes it was fresh fruit in a cracked plastic container. Other times it was rotting apples in a thick slab of heavy raw meat. And I remembered the hunger. I remember sitting up on a blanket over the bushes beside a fence, a small hidden nest where I could crouch and store what I was given. And I don't even know why I did this. It just something made me do it. And I remember eating like an animal. I don't even know what the hunger came from because sometimes I would have just eaten and then suddenly every time I saw the food, I became like famished, like I hadn't eaten in days. And I just devoured whatever was edible before anyone could find me. I remember my scalp itching constantly, lice maybe multiplying, biting, crawling, with no one bothering to stop them. A whole kingdom of parasites living freely in my hair. Again, was this a dream? Was this real? I couldn't even tell. But then I remembered a hand. It slipped through the narrow gap between the fence and the bushes where I sat with my back pressed against the timber, wrestling upon the spiny branches where I would apparently eat this food. The hand was enormous but gentle, and a long finger brushed the tangled hair out of my face, and the itching would fade immediately. I stared up and saw nothing but the endless length of a thin gray arm disappearing over the fence, and I remember wrapping my hands around that enormous finger and holding it tight and even crying into it. Then I remembered an angry voice coming from somewhere. The finger wriggled gently until I released it, and then the hand vanished and the arm withdrew. And when I looked back up, only a faint wisp of hair was visible above the fence line. Someone tore the blanket away from my hiding place. They yelled, screamed in disgust. I was sitting on a hoard of food with a lot of it was rotting. There were flies, there were maggots. Hands grabbed my arm and dragged me out of the bushes and away from the massive fence so hard that I thought bone would actually snap. Stop! I screamed. The third time I went back to mow Ramona's lawn, I did not hesitate. Something had begun to clarify itself inside of me, like an image slowly kind of coming into focus. And I knew I needed to speak to her, Ramona, finally. I didn't know if the memories were wholly real, but pieces were fitting together now, clicking into place with kind of quiet inevitability. So I felt closer to the truth than I ever had before, and instead of just making my head ache, I planted something determined. It planted something determined inside of me, something that refused to be quiet any longer. So I thought maybe my neighbor had been a sweet old granny who babysat me sometimes. Maybe she fed me. Maybe she took care of me. Maybe some stuff has been warped into being a dream, but there's some truth to it. Um, Maybe this was the only way my memories were able to return, disguised as something else, something not quite real, but threaded through truth. So I started the lawnmower this time, but I didn't look away from the fence. I remembered the humming, the low, steady hum as I lay hidden in the bushes beside the fence. The yelling in the house always softened when I listened to her hums. I remembered being lifted so high that I could see over the roof of my house. I remember being placed on a sturdy tree sturdy tree branch in the forest, and being given a dead fox or something. I remember biting into its furry flesh, feeling warm blood dribble down my cheeks. I don't know. This is weird, but I can't tell dreams from reality when it comes to this stuff anymore. I remembered sitting in the cocoon of warmth, high above the ground, watching the stars blink into existence. I remember running to my hiding place between the fence and the bushes, shaking, starving, and sick with fear. I remember someone chasing me. Henry, you get back here right now, you little shit, she screamed. She caught my arm and wrenched me around. Mummy, stop, I sobbed. Don't hurt me again. I remember my mother freezing. I remembered something brushing the back of my neck, light and familiar with long strands of hair. My mother gasped, staring at something above us, this terror laced into her face. I looked up and then the fingers came. They wrapped around my mother's body, lifted her up, 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 and she screamed as she went. So I called out, It's okay, Mommy, she's just taking you to see the stars. There was a deafening crunch and her screaming stopped, and I saw something fly across the sky like a meteor, just disappearing into the forest. Hands closed around me, and they were so warm they lifted me, gentle, careful, concuding me as I shook and clung to the heat. I rose high enough to see over the roof of my house, just like all those other times. I finally remember seeing her face. The image was clear now, unblurred, impossible to look down from. She was pale, gaunt, her lips stretched too wide across her skull, but her eyes, they were dark, but they were warm. Did Mummy like seeing the stars? I asked her. She hummed. The hand shook. I didn't turn the lawnmower off. I walked down towards her house on numb legs, the sound of the engine fading into something distant, barely there. The front door was open as always. I climbed the staircase slowly. A slow groan echoed from above, stretching and um, deepening as I went, and the upper floor was completely open plan, wide and sloping like an expansive attic. And laid out across it was a very tall woman. Her skin was a shade close to gray. Her face had weathered features of someone much older than me. Her limbs were long and spindly, and she lay on her side on a soft floor mat that covered nearly every inch of the space, her body folded carefully, purposely, as if she had made herself smaller for me, and her eyes found mine the moment I stepped inside. I dropped to my knees and sobbed before I could stop myself. Terror and grief and everything I had buried for so long rushed through me all at once, crushing and merciless. Fingers reached out, impossibly large, wrapped around me, and grabbed me gently towards her. I, I, I was pulled into warmth and steady, and my shivering body slowly began to ease. You killed her, I said. You killed her, didn't you? She hummed softly. Why? Why did you do that? I said, the words breaking apart as they left me. She brushed my hair back. My cries thinned into small broken whimpers. Why didn't she care about me? I whispered. Why did she let me starve? Why did she hurt me? I was just a little kid. The warmth held. Her breathing stayed, slowed, even. I fell asleep. When I woke up, I was in bed. Across from me, seated in an armchair, was a little old lady. Her eyes were distant, as if part of her had wandered somewhere far away and hadn't yet found its way back. Still, they stayed on me, steady and patient. We were still upstairs. The massive mat lay stretched across the floor, unchanged. The bed had been tucked into a small corner of the room, like it had been put there for me. Who are you? I asked. What was that thing? She didn't answer. Instead, her gaze drifted to something beside me. I followed it and saw a folded note resting on the mattress. I picked it up with shaking hands. I cursed with sighs and hunger, but I protect, sweet little boy, cold and hungry. I carry you to the stars, where she not reach. I lost myself when I took her, but she not hurt you anymore. Forgive me, please. When I drove home, I finally asked my uncle to tell me the truth. I'd always known something horrible happened to my mother, but there was details surrounding the event that deep down I think I never wanted to learn. But I felt stronger now, and I was ready. He showed me pictures first. They were of me as a little boy. My hair was long and scraggy. I wore dirty clothes that were torn at the seams. My body was mapped with bruises and cuts, and burn marks. There wasn't much to know in the end, except the fact that my mother was a monster. When she was found in the woods one day, half eaten, a case that would quickly be declared an animal attack. People called it karma after they learned what she did to me. Keep in mind, this is a fake story from Reddit. I continued to visit Ramona. I brushed her hair and cared for her when she was little, old granny. I lay down, listened to her hums when she was something else. I wrote all this down because, unlike my mother, Ramona deserves to be remembered. I could never tell anyone about her. They would have hurt her or killed her. But I needed someone to know. Ramona would have been a beast, but it wasn't her fault. When she lost control, it all came down to instinct to protect. When she was dying, I fell holding her. When she was dying, I fell asleep holding her large hand, and when she woke up, there was nothing. She was gone. Even though she doesn't live here anymore, even though the house is no longer occupied, I still go back to mow her lawn. And sometimes when the lawn is done, I linger until the night swallows the sky. When I focus on constellations, I almost feel like